Welcome, everybody. I'm Barrett Kendrick with Defender School. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join today. I still see some people coming on. Excited. We've got people tuning in. It looks like from all over the country today. So I do appreciate everybody who has taken the time to get on. We will be going through the events that took place at the Robb Elementary School today in Uvalde, Texas, back in May of this year, right before it let out for summer. We'll certainly get into that. With me, myself, as mentioned, my name is Barrett Kendrick. The company is Defender School. I have personally been teaching in the personal defense and active shooter response spaces since about 2009, so just over 13 years of experience in teaching this material and working through that. While Defender School is a Florida-based company, I am actually residing and live and work mostly in the southern Louisiana area. But we're very proud to partner with different educational facilities, houses of worship, multiple types of businesses to help them be better prepared to plan, to be able to respond more efficiently to an active killer type of event. So thanks everyone that is joining today. With some slides, I'll go ahead and get shared up while everybody's still kind of tuning in here. Let's see. I do have this recording, so hopefully we'll make this available for those that were not able to jump on. While we can't change the past, and we certainly can't do anything to take away from the wounds that have been suffered by the Uvalde community, it is very important, I think, that we look further into these types of events to be able to learn from them, so that history, is not repeated. These are the faces, these are the names of the victims, and obviously, these are the ones that were killed. And the community itself, the families, the friends, the school, obviously the victim list goes well beyond the faces that you're seeing on the screen today. The FBI has warned us not to provide any notoriety at all to the killers. This is one of the big motives is notoriety. And so it's important that, as we go back and even, as we carry the media coverage of these events and as we talk about them, that, we're not going to show his face. We're not going to mention his name. And you're not going to see me do that here today. These are the faces. These are the names that, that we should be focused on. These and the heroes that arrive, during these types of active killer events. It's important to understand that the focus of this webinar today is solely based on the lessons that can be applied from the educational facilities, and not on the response of law enforcement. We're focusing solely on what can be implemented in the schools or what can be changed in the schools. Obviously, it's also important anytime before changing policy or implementing different equipment that you are, consulting with any regulatory bodies that may have regulations in place, such as the State Fire Marshal's Office, building codes, those kinds of things. Today is the Robb Elementary School shooting event. And there are definitely overlapping lessons from this one with others, but it's also important to understand that each type of event like this is going to be unique. It's going to be different from the past. Most of the information that we're going through today has been taken directly from the official report that has been provided from the committee from the State House of Representatives in Texas. They issued this report back in August. So most of what we're going to be talking about is known as facts. The chaos during an active shooter, active killer type of event is far more than most people could, ever comprehend or expect. And because of the amount of chaos that takes place, there's lots of misinformation that comes out, especially in the first hours and days, afterward. Even just in the past couple of weeks, we're learning that some of the information that people thought were true or was true earlier on has been proven to be completely false. But as mentioned, most of the information we're going through here should be factual information coming directly from the official report. And I'll try to be accurate as much as I possibly could, but understand that just that is one of the issues that when we try to go back and study these types of events is that there is lots of chaos. The FBI has been heavily tracking active killer type information, active killer events since back in the early 2000s, really since Columbine. When Columbine happened, that's where lots of things change. And we're not going to get into all of that kind of stuff today, but I think it is important to take a look at this chart of active killer events over the past 22 years where they are definitely trending up. There's no doubt about it that they are happening more often, but thankfully it is also still the anomaly. Meaning you're much more likely to face, gang violence in a school parking lot than you are to face an event where someone comes to the school with intention on actually harming people. And FBI defines an active killer as someone who is actively engaged, or one or more people who are actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. The active aspect of this definition implies that it is ongoing. And since it's ongoing by nature, that means that we have a potential to change the outcome solely based on the response, based on our actions, based on our decisions, can heavily influence the outcome of these types of events. It's also important to understand that active for law enforcement means that the urgency is extremely high and that the victim's safety is placed high above officer safety, meaning that all tactics and training change, that they're going in disregarding their own safety to attempt to stop the killer, to attempt to save people, to stop the event. As soon as it's no longer considered active, then the response from law enforcement, certainly can change, and policy would dictate officer safety at that point, traditionally over the victim safety. And so when we talk about an active killer event or an active shooter event, we are talking about something that is ongoing. We'll kind of circle back to that because that does come into play a little bit later on as we go through. But as we jump through the events that took place in Uvalde, Texas, I'll go through mostly in chronological order, and I'll go through the event. And as mentioned, it's unfortunately it is violent by nature, but it is important that we peel back some of these layers to be able to better understand how to be better prepared in the future. This chart that you're currently looking at, it's a look at active killer events over several years, and what it continually shows is that typically active shooters or active killers are spending at least 1 to 2 months planning these types of events. Is that it is not impulsive by nature. It is typically something that someone stews over for several months, potentially longer, as well as, it's what happened with the Uvalde shooter as well. And, if you look at something like Sandy Hook, the killer with Sandy Hook, I think planned for just about 2 years for that type of event. And, what that means is that they're spending time to learn patterns. They're spending time to learn the behavior. They're spending time to learn how to circumvent security. And that wasn't any different with the shooter from the Uvalde school shooting. The report has shown that he likely started thinking about planning an attack in late 2021, but the evidence showed that he really started to carry out that plan in early 2022. He had a big falling out with his mom. In fact, there was a big argument and fight between the two that was live streamed out on social media platform. And at that point, he moved out of his mother's house and moved into his grandmother's house, was just a couple of blocks away from the actual elementary school. And that was more likely was the catalyst, or the trigger was the fight and falling out with his mom. He also had a lot of ill thoughts for his dad as well, and did not have a strong relationship with him either. But at the time, he was underage. He was not old enough to be able to purchase firearms. He actually reached out to several family members attempting to get them to illegally straw purchase firearms for him. All the family members who he had contacted had turned him down with that as well. But he did start buying different accessories and other pieces that would have later be used in the actual shooting itself. In March of this year, so just a few months before the actual shooting took place, there was a suspicious person that had been reported at the Robb Elementary School. He was dressed in all black, wearing a backpack, and was likely, or what looked like was canvassing the actual campus. It was never confirmed that it was him, but with hindsight, it obviously there was a good chance that it may have been him doing some reconnaissance, earlier on to the actual shooting that took place. He had a lot of different online, interactions that were happening, prior to the shooting that very potentially foreshadowed a tragedy. On April 2nd, he asked in a direct message on Instagram to a group of people, to an individual, are you going to remember me in 50 something days? After the answer, probably not, he reported with, all right, we'll see in May. And so he had a lot of stuff like that where he was giving different timelines that were potentially predicting, the actions that he may have taken in the future, and ultimately did take in the future. The attacker also often connected the dates when he was talking with someone, about doing something that would make him famous and put him all over the news. And many of those whom he chatted with suspected that his cryptic deadlines did mean violence. And so numerous people around him, did feel that he had a potential, to be, a violent individual. And on May 14th, so it's just a week or so, a little over a week, prior to the actual shooting, he wrote, 10 more days, leading to immediate speculation that he meant that he would shoot up a school or something. And those are quotes, that he would shoot up a school or something, or commit mass murder on those dates. So the people around him, they saw the hints, and obviously none of it was explicit and overt, but there was a lot of messages where he implied that he would be carrying something out. And all of that type of information, all of this, I guess if you wanted to call it leaked information, was all among private individuals. And so none of that, had a potential for the school administrators to be able to come across it, without obviously someone reporting those types of events. On May 17th, a friend told him, that an acquaintance of theirs, was telling people that he was saying that, he's telling everyone that he was going to shoot up a school. And so, somebody even kind of confronted him, with that as well. There have been, a lot of that type of linked information and that type of behavior, prior to the event, but ultimately he had no criminal history, and he had never been arrested. He had no strong ideology or political views of any kind. He was not posting those kinds of messages. He's someone that ultimately did become infatuated with notoriety. All the warning signals, as I mentioned, were purely among private individuals and not anyone else. His a co-worker in the report described him as not a good person, who was troubled, someone who would put himself in a box and not talk or associate with anyone he worked with. He was described by his girlfriend that he was lonely, that he was depressed. His original job with Whataburger was terminated by the employer after a month because he had threatened a female coworker, and his new job at Wendy's resulted in the same, where he was threatening people that he was working with. But ultimately, he developed a fascination, with school shootings. He made no secret of that, and all the social media groups and messages that he was part of. He was making that kind of information known. He, as he did eventually purchase firearms after turning 18, he would post pictures, of the guns, not tie the threats directly to the actual firearms, but if, of course, with hindsight, looking back on more of a holistic approach to it, we can see that there were definitely lots of cues that were leading up to that event. But he demonstrated interest in gore and violent sex, rape, would make threats of attacking people and rape towards others. Watched a lot of videos of suicides, beheadings, different accidents. His online usernames did reflect themes of confrontations, of violence. He had a reputation of not being able to handle any sort of losing the games. Anytime he would lose the online games, his response directly would go to threats of violence towards whoever he lost to. His comments that he would leave on the social media platform Yubo, coupled with his wild threats of violence and rape, ended up earning him the nickname of Yubo's school shooter. And so in different areas, both amongst peers, with school, his friends that he was around, as well as online, he was being nicknamed the school shooter. Lots of people could, obviously it's with hindsight that we understand that, that he truly was becoming a school shooter and planning to do that. But those people closest around him certainly had the hair standing up on the back of their neck. They were able to see that something wasn't right. He dressed a lot in all black. He had mentioned he did not like being around people. He was a very lonely individual. He had threatened suicide or confided in an older cousin that he was thinking about killing himself, and that was just 1 week before the shooting. He did not want to live anymore. They had a lengthy heart-to-heart discussion, and she believed that she had gotten through to him. that he, no longer was contemplating suicide. As mentioned, this was just 1 week prior to the shooting. The attacker's uncle, also recalled having similar discussions, with him. He wrote about not being able to connect with others. He did not see himself as human. He referred to others as human in a derogatory way. He was above everyone else. He also likely considered himself a sociopath. The forensic searches of his computer showed that he was, searching for those types of answers, for that type of material leading up to the shooting, on trying to, figure out whether or not that he was a sociopath. He hadn't seen his father in about a month prior to the shooting, but the father had noticed some wounds on his face that looked like self-inflicted cuts. And there were some, another individual that also noticed the self-inflicted wounds as well. So just lots of information leading up to the event, but ultimately he became obsessed with achieving notoriety. And we've seen this, several times prior, with active killers. This is also why we have a tendency to have a copycat crime, and how they seem to happen back to back is that someone sees the notoriety that the other killer gets and they want it themselves. So those that are already on that path, end up acting out, pretty quickly. But as mentioned, after he turned 18, he started securing firearms, did buy, multiple rifles, also bought lots of ammunition. As mentioned, he was previously already buying accessories. He was living with his grandmother at the time. She became aware of the firearms in the house, and she was not okay with that and made him remove the guns from the home. I believe that the family only knew about one of them at the time, and that gun was stored at his uncle's house. And he likely ended up stealing it back because it ended up going missing, and he had just stayed there a few days before the incident himself. This is an overview of the area. The area circled in red is the school, and a couple of blocks away, you'll notice the house there. That's the grandmother's house, and so that's where he was living at the time of the shooting himself. He was a prior student of the school years ago. Although I don't recall seeing reports of it in the official report, I do believe that there has been evidence to show that he had issues growing up, starting with the 4th grade, and of course that's the classrooms out of all of them in the school that he went directly towards. And so we don't know if obviously if that was a matter of convenience for him because that was the closest to him, or if he was explicitly, targeting those schools because of the prior issues that he had that ultimately socially had started, back in the 4th grade with bullying and whatnot. But leading up to the shooting, he was very upset that day. His grandmother was upset with him, and so his grandmother was canceling his phone plan. And so his phone was part of her cell phone plan. She was actually on the phone with the carrier that day and had been on the phone for several minutes with the carrier to drop his phone coverage. And that ultimately ends up being the trigger of the day for him. He was messaging, with a girl overseas in Germany about his frustrations with losing his phone plan and for what his grandmother was doing. So he was messaging all that, to the girl in Germany. He, had stated he was going to do something to his grandmother during the message and during those complaints. But he messaged that he was about to do something to her. and then moments later messaged back to the girl in Germany that he had just shot her in the head and that he was going to go shoot up an elementary school. And so that was that was the trigger of the day. And like I said, it wasn't impulsive. He had been planning for several months leading up to it, but this is the day that carried it back. The girl, messaged back to him the single word "cool." That was her response. Now that response was deleted, and the screenshot that was being floated around the internet in the days and weeks after. But through forensic searching, obviously it was located. That was her response back, to him was "cool." And so he, leaves leaves the house to start carrying out the horrific events at the elementary school, that day. He takes a pickup truck, leaves the house down the path highlighted on the screen, and loses control of the vehicle, and ultimately ends up wrecking out in the drainage ditch that ends up being next to the school as well. So this was 11:28 a.m., just a couple of minutes after he shot his grandmother in the head. By the way, she actually was able to crawl to a neighbor's house and get help. So about the same time, you've got 911 calls going out to law enforcement of the shooting that took place of the grandmother being shot in the head. Multiple surgeries later, she is a survivor of that incident. This is a couple images of the pickup truck down in the drainage ditch. Jump forward just a little bit, you can see where the drainage ditch is in relation to the school itself. Now, it's these pictures don't show it very well, but there's a several foot drop from road level to the bottom of the drainage ditch, and that's why the vehicle looks as mangled as it did. I don't know if his intention, was to drive forward, where, there is a way that he could have driven ultimately down the side and maybe through the fence. So I'm not sure if that was his intention was to drive through the fence and go that way, or if he just simply lost control of the vehicle. But ultimately, he did end up wrecking out. And if you've ever been around a wreck that it results in that kind of damage and squealing tires and whatnot, they can be very loud. And this one wasn't any different. And so at 11:28 a.m., he ends up crashing the vehicle at the funeral home next door. This is across the street from the school. You have two individuals that come out to try to help him, right? There's a wreck. And so they start moving towards him to see if he needs any help. He sees them approaching and immediately starts shooting at them with the rifle. Thankfully, they weren't hit. They ran back inside, and 1 minute within the time that he had wrecked the vehicle, at 11:29, a minute later, they were already calling 911 to report the shooter. And the law enforcement was on the scene pretty quickly. They do not have a dedicated school resource officer for the campus. Instead, the school district itself has its own police force, or did at the time. So they had their own police force. There was not enough officers to go around for every single campus. And so basically what they did was rotate throughout the day and do campus patrols. And so that's why there was not a law enforcement officer on the property or a school resource officer on the property at that time. But after he shoots towards the individuals, he jumps a fence. Now, the fence was your typical chain link fence, but it was only 5 feet, so not much more than chest high on an adult. But he was seen jumping over the fence with a backpack by Coach Yvette Silva. She's outside with a group of third graders. She spots him tossing the backpack over the fence and sees him, running with the gun as he raises up the gun. And so she's already at that point, notifying. So at 11:30, 11:29, she's already notifying the school office via radio that there was a shooter running to the school. About that same time as he's running up, he starts shooting into the classrooms from the parking lot. And so they're trying to get the kids back off the playground, back inside while he is running up. At 11:30, you started having teachers lock down based solely on word of mouth. But she had called into the office to report the shooter. And the principal is ultimately who took the call on the radio. They have an application, a school-wide communication application, which was the Raptor application, that would allow anyone to be able to quickly initiate the lockdown procedure. Unfortunately, there was difficulty getting the application to work. There was spotty Wi-Fi in the area that she was in, and that likely delayed the signal going out. She did not communicate the lockdown alert over the intercom. So she just attempted through the app. Nothing at all went out over the school-wide intercom. But what she did do was contact the school district chief of police, who was at the high school at the time, and he was en route responding already to the shooting. At 11:32, the first teacher receives the lockdown alert through the application, and she starts to lock down. If I remember correctly, that was room 105, which is across the room, across the hall from room 111 and 112, where the most of the shooting ended up taking place. But the teacher, as she's initiating the lockdown and steps in the hall, she also sees the Miss Garcia in room 112 locking her door as well. And so you can see now the room 111 and 112, while separate rooms, they do have adjoining doors and their own entry doors that were leading through the room. But as the shooter started running through the parking lot, you can see the red arrows as he's running towards the west door. He's already shooting into the classroom from the outside. And so you had teachers that were responding to gunfire coming in from the outside. Everybody, was ducking down, and they're initiating the lockdown procedures as well. At 11:33, the shooter entered in through the west door. Now, the policy dictates all exterior doors are supposed to be locked. There was supposed to be one door where all traffic that does not have a key is funneled through. But he was able to make it through the west door. The door, unfortunately, was unlocked. Now, just prior to that, there was a teacher that had gone out to the parking lot, and highly likely it wasn't that, she, didn't manually lock the doors. Unfortunately, the door did not close properly, did not lock properly. And there were several issues that existed like that. So that door was unlocked. Had it been locked, his response likely would have either been prevented or his attack would have been prevented or slowed down potentially tremendously. But he was able to walk right in through the locked door. Also, policy dictates that all classroom doors are to remain shut and locked while classroom is in session. And that was not the case with several of the classrooms. So they were having to integrate the lockdown procedure as they were moving forward with it, and the doors weren't already locked. They were having to manually lock them. One of the police officers that is responding, one of the first officers on the scene, he sees kids running inside. He also sees someone dressed in black. that is running towards the school. He actually believes that is the shooter at that point, and asks permission from his sergeant to respond with the rifle and to shoot the attacker. The permission from the sergeant thankfully didn't come fast enough. As evidence showed, it was not the attacker. And that window closed anyway before the police officer realized that it was not the attacker, and it was simply the coach running back into the school. But that's the kind of chaos that can happen, is that, you know, when you're running and you have officers that are running towards an active killer, is that everything's based on their perception at the moment and not necessarily based on truth or things that would be learned false in the aftermath. But just a tremendous amount of chaos. But at 11:33, the shooter does enter the school through the west entrance, and his path is highlighted in blue. He immediately goes into room 111. The door, none of the evidence shows that the door was locked. Nobody saw the teacher locking the door. The teacher does not recall even hearing the lockdown being initiated at all. And so by all evidence, the door highly likely was unlocked. It was a malfunctioning door lock. It required dedication to be able to get closed and locked. But he goes into room 111 and 112, and over the next 2.5 minutes, pretty much has the school to himself without law enforcement in the building, and he fires over 100 rounds in those first 2.5 minutes. And that's obviously, you know, when most of the shooting took place was during that time. As mentioned, you know, the door did not secure properly, but it's also very important to note that there had never been a work order to repair the door that had been generated, even though it had been reported by numerous teachers about not working properly and about not locking properly. We'll come back to some of the stronger lessons when it comes to the locks later on during the webinar as well. But many people were aware of the fact that that door did not work very well at all. But at 11:35, just 3 minutes after or just about 2.5 minutes after the shooter entered into the building, is when law enforcement first came into the building. The first officers responded to and coming through the west door, the same path that the shooter took. The second responding group of officers came in through the south side and the south door. Again, just I can't highlight enough the amount of chaos that takes place during these types of events. But total, there were 376 officers that responded to this shooting. Obviously, not all of them in the first couple of minutes, but a tremendous amount coming through. But unfortunately, the officers' radios did not work inside of the building. The technology that they were using was more designed for large, expansive areas over rural areas. And not the urban environment that would have allowed them to work more reliably in the building. So very little communication among the officers inside of the building. But after being shot at, after the officers approached room 111, they were immediately shot at, getting hit with shrapnel from the rounds and from the environment splashing back at them. And so they pulled back at that point. Well, after they pulled back, everything went quiet. And so the officers that were there at that point believed that that it had moved from an active incident to more of a barricaded subject, where he wasn't actively shooting someone. Everything was quiet. They didn't hear victims. They didn't hear screaming. They didn't know what was going on in the rooms because everything was completely quiet. They believed the doors were locked because that's what policy dictates. And so there was a long struggle for the officers there trying to come up with the keys. There's a tremendous amount of stuff that happened over the next 77 minutes, over the next greater than an hour. And as I mentioned, we're not going to go through all of that information, and it's outside the scope of the webinar today, but just understand that lots of chaos, lots of lack of communication, and the report shows lots of lack of leadership among the responding officers as well for ultimately at least the first hour. But at 12:50, the TAC team does end up breaching the door and ultimately does end up shooting the attacker, killing him, at that point. I can't, can't highlight enough. There's a tremendous amount of lessons that exist inside of all of this, but I want to reduce this down to specifically where the most amount of important information that can be very easily applied among the schools through policy and equipment on what we already have, available to us. These factual conclusions were published in the official report, as mentioned, from the Texas House of Representatives Investigative Committee that was put together for the Robb Elementary shooting. With the communication lockdown alerts. Poor Wi-Fi in the Robb Elementary likely delayed the lockdown alert through the Raptor application. Once the alert was sent, not all teachers received it immediately for a variety of reasons. Some of them had bad Wi-Fi coverage. Some of them did not even use the Raptor phone application. They would just normally log in through the website. And some of the teachers weren't carrying their cell phones at that time. Nobody used the school intercom as another means to initiate and communicate the lockdown. As a result, not all the teachers received timely notice of the lockdown, including the teacher that was in room 11 at that time. You've heard the term bailouts that have been described on the news likely many times at this point. Ultimately, what that is referring to most of the time, Uvalde is very near our southern border. And there's been a tremendous amount of human trafficking along the southern border in the past couple of years, and numerous times, in fact, almost 50 times from February to May leading up to the shooting, there were bailouts that took place near the Uvalde school. The bailout being that your human smuggler, your human trafficker, would run from police and try to provide an opportunity to all of the those that were being smuggled to bail out of the vehicle and try to run from law enforcement and get away from them. And so that happened 48 times between February and May of that year. Well, what that led to was a boy cried wolf type of response, from a lot of the teachers, is that there were a tremendous amount of, you could call them false alarms, in the sense that there wasn't any different in the lockdown alert that would take place from that bailout where they would lock the school down versus the actual active killer on the school campus. And so because of that, that definitely caused some issues in the response with some of the teachers. With lessons with the doors and locks, Robb Elementary had reoccurring problems with maintaining its doors and locks. In particular, the locking mechanism to room 111 was widely known to be faulty, yet it was not repaired. The elementary principal, her assistant, who was responsible for entering a maintenance work order, the teacher in room 111, other teachers in the fourth grade building, and even many fourth grade students widely knew of the problem with the lock to room 111. With this room, it had a reputation of not working, but there was a printer in the room. So different kids and teachers would use that room to be able to gain quick access to a printer because they knew that it wasn't locked. But nevertheless, no one placed a work order to repair the lock, not the principal, the secretary, the teacher, or anyone else. The maintenance staff was unaware they had never received a work order for that. Robb Elementary had a culture of non-compliance with safety policies requiring doors to be kept locked, which did turn out to be fatal. Now, part of the officer's responsibilities for the school safety officer, the school resource officer that would patrol the campuses, they would go through and check the doors. Anytime they found a door unlocked, they would bring it to the attention of the teacher. They would try to educate, try to get the teacher to understand just how important it was to keep all the doors locked, but that was not the case. It was very common for teachers to use magnets to circumvent the locks to prevent the doors from locking. They would prop rocks in the doors, leave the doors open. That was a widely known issue at that school. And as mentioned, the report did find that turned out to be fatal because of that. As mentioned with the exterior doors, they often propped them open using rocks. The door at the West building was supposed to be continuously locked, but when the attacker approached, it was unlocked and he was easily able to enter the building there. If the door had been locked as policy required, the attacker would have likely been slowed down for some period of time as he either circumvented the lock or moved to another entry point into the building. And we already understand it's going to be the same, for the interior locks. They're supposed to be locked at all time, but yet the teachers continuously circumvented the locks and chose not to keep them locked, out of convenience for the students or for the teachers. There were known issues, and unfortunately, as mentioned already, that did turn out to prove fatal with the response. With the law enforcement response, as I talked about, it's beyond the scope of the webinar, but it can be summarized in two big categories. There was a major lack of communication inside of and outside of the building, in the sense that the people outside could not communicate with the officers inside. The officers on the west wing were unable to communicate with the officers on the south wing as well, except via cell phone from dedicated conversations when that was taking place. So a huge issue with communication inside the building. And there was also not an established incident commander. The school district police department active shooter policy called for the police chief to be the incident commander in any active shooter response. However, he was one of the first officers on the scene, and he saw himself more as a responding officer than he did an incident commander. So he never took control of command, and unfortunately, until much later in the incident, no one else did as well. And so there was a lack of command and a lack of communication were the two biggest categories where there were issues with the law enforcement side on the official report. But moving forward, lock door policies should be enforced. Locks should be routinely tested. Doors should be routinely tested and repaired when they're not working as expected. And this is true not just for this active killer event, but this is true for almost all of them, is that time barriers can have a significant impact on the survivability and law enforcement response. 376 officers responded to this shooting. It's a tremendous amount of law enforcement officers responding. They were on scene within a couple of minutes. Had the shooter been slowed down just a little bit, this likely would have had a very different outcome. And it's not just about locks and doors, but just time barriers in general are going to be, one of the biggest variables that can have an impact on the outcome of these types of events. And so moving forward, it's important to be prepared with all aspects of it. Layered security, time barriers, doing everything that we could do. The 5-foot fence obviously was not very difficult for him to be able to get through. Even, if it would have been a 10-foot fence, there's obviously ways to circumvent it, but the more that we can slow the individual down, the better it is for everyone. But instituting those different time barriers and layers to help make it harder for the attacker. Training is training and drilling, with the teachers. And obviously this should already be something that is being instituted on a regular basis with the schools. But if not, I can't highlight, getting everybody trained and on the same plan, being able to respond more efficiently so that people know what to do and they're empowered to know what to do. Things like the fact that the application wasn't allowing the lockdown alert to go out. Well, they already knew there was a school shooter there. Had someone had the training and had they drilled on the front end to use the intercom system, then that may have provided, more time and more opportunity for the response from the teachers. Communication with the teachers, communication with the students. As mentioned, all data shows from the FBI reporting over the past 20 plus years is that people spend time training, and that many times the information of the attack is leaked 2.5 years or somewhere inside of that window prior to the attack. And so open up those communication channels to make it easier for people to get that information out. The Department of Homeland Security has previously stated that because an active shooter situation is often over within 10 to 15 minutes before law enforcement arrives on the scene, individuals must be prepared both mentally and physically to deal with an active shooter situation. And I can't stress that, enough in working with it. My contact information, is on the screen. If you use your camera, you can import that information just using the QR code with the contacts. I would love to have a conversation with you if I can help with any questions that you might have. If you do have any questions right now, obviously you're more than welcome to type them into the chat box. I'll pull those up and take a look at them just here momentarily as well. But with Defender School, we have both an online e-learning system to make it very easy to be able to get that information out to large groups of staff and teachers and employees very quickly, very efficiently, where they can go through at their own time and own pace, as well as we do in-person live seminars, live training, where we come in and do the hands-on training. And as if you, I would love to be able to take the time to sit down, have a conversation, answer any questions that you may have about our program, about training in general. Like the webinar, obviously there's no charge for any of that. But if I can be helpful for any of you moving forward, then I would love to be able to help out with that. As I said earlier, we can't change the victims of the past. We can't, there's no way that we can change history, but we can learn from it moving forward. And there are different lessons that come up with each of these types of incidents, where very easily, with hindsight, we could have changed the outcome to a certain degree. We could have increased the survivability with it, but you can't do it in the moment. You can't do it in the aftermath of it. We can't go back and change anything. And so I urge anyone who is an administrator of a school to implement the policies now, to fix what needs to be fixed now. It doesn't matter what attack that you look at, no one started their morning that day thinking that they were going to school to become victim of a deranged killer, of an active shooter, of someone who did not value their life any more than a cockroach in the corner. And no one started their day that way. And that's how all of these have all been, is that it's never going to happen to me. And thankfully, for most people, that is absolutely true. And I don't believe that we should be scared. I don't believe that we should be paranoid to go to school, to work at school, to send our kids to school. I have young kids, they are in school. So I certainly don't think that we should be scared to do that. But at the same time, I believe that it's also important that we are properly prepared. We have dedicated a tremendous amount of resources over the years for the fire danger and fire risk in schools, and because of that, or some of that, thankfully, we have not had a child die in a school fire since, I believe, the 1950s. And so we're not scared to go to school because there's a fire risk, but we are prepared, we are trained, and we do have a plan for that kind of stuff. And I think that the same should be, for the active killer response, is that it needs to be part of what we're doing from day to day. So I'd love to have a conversation with you if you'd like to learn more about that. I do appreciate y'all taking the time to tune in today as well. Let's see, I've got some questions about the cost of the online training. And with that, I've tried to keep the cost as low as that we can keep it. With our online program, for most schools, for most entities, it works out to be about $15 per teacher, per staff member, per volunteer, per viewing license, per year. So about $15 per person per year. Very nominal fee. We do have other information besides the active shooter response material. That library of information will continue to grow. And as right now, that price will stay the same on that. Got another question about the mechanism for locking doors that open out. The best way is obviously to get locks on the doors that allow you to simply lock the door. That's the way that is not going to upset the fire marshal. In an emergency, there's ways that you can improvise the response to be able to prevent those doors from opening. And we do go through a lot of that, different options that we have during our training, but also understand that the fire marshal explicitly says that you can't lock doors that way when you have kids in a classroom, because of the other dangers and other risks. So it would only be allowed in the event, of a type of emergency. So the NFPA regulations dictate two different type of lock mechanisms. Ideally, it's the same locks that you've seen in hotels, where there is a swing deadbolt, but just turning the lever of the door also automatically unlocks the door, that it will not slow down anyone's egress. But for doors that are being retrofitted to save money, there are other options with just traditional throw levers, like with the deadbolts. It is important, as mentioned, to check with the fire marshal to make sure that you're not doing anything that would get you in trouble with that. But nationally speaking, they have provided a couple of options to be able to lock the doors very quickly, very easily, that will not slow down the egress. And they've published some papers on that as well. I'll send out an email, to everyone who has tuned in today, and I will provide some of those links from the NFPA website, the white papers on that as well. I believe that was the questions that came in. I've got another question about how does the e-learning compare to ALICE? I have been through the ALICE training. I think that it doesn't matter which direction you're looking into. Almost everyone in some form or fashion follows the run, hide, fight model. And the program that I teach also follows that as well. But I'm more empowering and proactive than what I would consider the Alice model or the traditional run, hide, fight model, or the alert center model as well. I've liked to empower people. I like to empower teachers. And so I break down really the fight component and the barricade component and even the evasion component a whole lot more than what the traditional run, hide, fight model is that I want to empower people to be able to really increase survivability. I also I teach more of an individual response when necessary, compared to the swarming model that Alice typically teaches, where it is dependent upon multiple people getting involved to be able to stop the attacker. But as mentioned, to a certain degree, while I break down things a little bit deeper, there are a lot of overlaps with the different programs that are being held. Another question about the recording of the webinar. Yes, I will have a recording available for this for those that have already watched, want to watch it again, or you want the ability to be able to share it with others. And after that recording is ready for viewing, then I'll definitely have that as part of the email that goes out as well. I'm getting another question about the fire alarms that should we start installing the blue fire alarm pull handle in schools so that anyone could easily alert the school in an active killer situation, meaning a lockdown alarm. I mean, I will say communication is key. The earlier the information goes out, the faster the response is, the more layers that can be put in place to make the attacker slow down. So I believe that anything that we can do to implement faster communication lockdown alerts is certainly going to be worth it. Time barriers are big, but the lockdown doesn't even start until people know about it. But so if we can get that alert out faster, then I think it's all the worth it. What we don't want happening is people pulling fire alarms when they are aware of an active killer, because our traditional response for a fire alarm is obviously very different than an active shooter situation. And so we don't want you pulling the fire alarms in lieu of that other form of lockdown communication. But yes, installing other options available to get that information out faster is certainly more beneficial as well. Also, I do follow in line with the standard school response protocol as well, with their lockdown procedures. And so while my model is slightly different, we are following that school standard safety protocol as well. I believe that's all the questions that have come in. As mentioned, I do thank everybody for taking the time. We've got people viewing from all over the place. And so I do thank you for taking the time. If you have any questions at all, as mentioned, you can email me at barrett@defenderschool.com, or certainly, feel free to drop the questions in here. We will continue to do these webinars where I will more likely each month break down a new event. Some of them will be geared towards educational facilities and obviously some other types of facilities as well. But with all of them, there's lessons that we can take from them. Thank you for viewing and hope to see you all in the next one.